Hello and welcome to Top Story. France is trying to invigorate its diplomacy on Syria as the French opposition party turns up the heat on recently elected President François Hollande. Members of the right-wing UMP have accused him of inaction, and even his predecessor Nicolas Sarkozy has implicitly criticised Hollande. Today, Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius kicks off a regional tour that takes him to Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio by Armin Georgian, our international affairs editor. Hello, Armin. Now, it's easy to criticise when you're no longer in government, isn't it?
Well, it is, and President Sarkozy, the predecessor, was known as the hyper-president. He was very loud on the world stage. He's remembered for being the first Western leader to recognise the Transitional National Council in Libya, and also for brokering a ceasefire between Russia and Georgia in 2008, or at least being the main mover in that. He broke his silence recently by co-signing a declaration with the head of the Syrian National Council, calling for swift action by the international community to avoid massacres, as they put it, an implicit criticism of François Hollande. And as you've said, the UMP has also made noises saying that there's basically a lack of French leadership on this whole issue, just as France has taken over the rotating presidency of the UN Security Council.
But unfortunately, during the month of August, when nothing much happens here in France on a political level. It's true, isn't it? Right. The Syrian situation, though, is much more complex, isn't it, than the Libyan one? So can there be leadership in this case from the French?
Well, again, it's easy to criticise, isn't it, from the sidelines. In fact, the Security Council is deadlocked, 3 vetoes on one issue. That's a situation that hasn't been seen since the Cold War. So France, under Sarkozy, had he won, would have been faced with this deadlock too. That said, France, as the head of the UN Security Council, can make a modest difference. Let's take a listen to the French UN ambassador Gérard Araud, interviewed by our correspondent Nathan King in New York.
Now, there is no humanitarian access in Syria, which means that all the humanitarian aid has to be channeled through the Syrian Red Crescent, which is quite decent, but which is totally overwhelmed by the challenge. 3 million of Syrians actually are lacking food, medicine, children's food. So it's really, we could demand the Syrian government, of course, but also the opposition, really to give access to the humanitarian aid.
But humanitarian aid is political too, Armin.
Well, if you were trying to allow aid into Aleppo, which is something the French are mooting, that would require a temporary ceasefire. That would mean the French and the Western powers would put certain conditions on Syrian government forces. The Russians and the Chinese would place conditions on the rebels. So in a way, you'd be back to those rifts in the Security Council. That's the shorter-term solution for Aleppo that the French have been talking about. Another idea that they've been mooting slightly longer term is setting up humanitarian corridors. But that, again, requires military force because you have to enforce the corridor. So even with the humanitarian issue, France wants to push that. Politics is never far away.
What should we expect then? As you say, Laurent Fabius is on his way later to the region. What should we expect from this trip to Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey?
Well, we saw those quite striking pictures of the French military hospital in Jordan in Nicholas Baker's report. And experts, these are experts in, war wounds, treating trauma, shock, all those things. So it really shows that France is obviously taking this seriously as a real war, and that it could be in for a long haul. And I think the visit to Syria's neighbours shows that France is perhaps considering setting up these facilities elsewhere. Of course, that requires good political ties between France and Syria's neighbours. Well, it already has that with Jordan, with the Kingdom of Jordan. With Lebanon, it's a complex relationship, but a close one. And with Turkey, there's been a thaw since François Hollande was elected president, and Laurent Fabius, the foreign minister, is seen as quite close to Ahmed Davutoglu, his Turkish counterpart. So obviously, stepping up that whole humanitarian assistance requires good political relations, and I think Fabius's visit is essentially about that.
Thank you very much for your analysis, Armin Georgian. That's the end of this edition of Top Story. Stay with us here on France 24.